swap over. Number 1 on environmental protection. I call the Minister to move the motion.
Not moved.
Not moved. We now come to the backbench motion of the performance of Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. Esther McVey to move.
Here.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that this House notes that the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, the MHRA, continues to need substantial revision, as recognised by the Independent Medicines and Medical Devices Safety Review, with patient safety concerns persisting and exacerbating since the review's publications in 2020. Notes too that the MHRA's 2017 Expert Working Group's reports on Primados was deeply flawed, with IMMDS later concluding the drug had caused avoidable harm. Further notes that the yellow card system for reporting suspected adverse drug reactions is failing, with no process for following up on serious or fatal reactions, and conflict of interests existing, with 75% of the MHRA's funding being derived from industry fees, a concern raised in the 2004 and 5 House of Commons Health Committee report, The Influence of the Pharmaceutical Industry, and also notes that the MHRA's delayed response to reports of myocarditis, pericarditis and vaccine-induced thrombotic thrombocytopenia following COVID-19 vaccinations, despite actions from regulators in other countries, and calls on the government to fully implement the recommendations of the IMDS review and to acknowledge the harm done to patients and the financial burden on the healthcare system as a result of the MHRA's widespread regulatory failures. I want to thank the Backbench Business Committee for granting this debate today, and I thank many colleagues from across the House who have supported the application to the committee, especially the Honourable Member for Blackley and Broughton, and also the Honourable Members for Bolton South and Walkden and Great Yarmouth. The Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, MHRA, is the body responsible for ensuring the safety and efficacy of medicines used in the UK. It is their job to oversee medical products, medicines, medical devices and blood components for transfusion. The responsibility they have is extremely important, as it comes with not only the potential to change people's lives for the better, but also to cause serious harm, even death, if poor decisions are made or safety signals are missed. The MHRA are required to scrutinise applications from the pharmaceutical companies for new products and devices, and also remain ever vigilant over existing drugs should safety problems arrive post-authorisation. They have to weigh up the arguments for and against these products and devices. After all, the companies trying to get these products onto the market and keep them there are driven, like all industries are, by commercial success. It is up to the MHRA to balance this with the health and safety of the UK and the public. So I think alarm bells rang for many of us when in March 2022, Dame June Rain, the Chief Executive of the MHRA, boasted of the agency's transition from watchdog to enabler. 20 years ago, the Health Committee report entitled The Influence of the Pharmaceutical Industry found that the MHRA was unusual in being one of the few European agencies funded entirely by fees derived from the services to this industry. Not much has changed, with the MHRA continuing to get 75% of its funding from the pharmaceutical industry. In this context, the agency's transition from watchdog to enabler does little to quell suspicions of conflicts and the implications that has for patient safety. One of the most worrying issues is the MHRA's mismanagement of the yellow card system. Established in 1964, the system is a way for patients, relatives and healthcare professionals to report suspected adverse reactions to drugs or medical devices. This reporting scheme should be a valuable source of information about possible harms and to act as an early warning system. But we know that there is a gross underreporting to the scheme, and that the IMMDS review in 2020 put it, the system is too complex and too diffuse to allow early signal detection. Underreporting is a big problem because it makes it difficult to spot safety signals and assign causation. This then translates into unnecessary harm or deaths with devastating side effects, from treatment going unnoticed for years, months or even decades. This was recognised by the IMDS review led by Baroness Cumberledge in the case of Primidos, sodium valproate and surgical mesh. Maybe it should have been mess, but it was mesh. According to research from Bangor University in 2019, potentially avoidable adverse drug reactions are costing the NHS $2.2 billion a year in hospital admissions. In 2018, the MHRA estimated that only 10% of serious reactions and between 2 to 4% of non-serious reactions are reported. More recently, they've claimed that reporting rates for COVID vaccines are better due to higher public awareness, but they haven't been able to point to published evidence to back that claim up. The yellow card is currently a voluntary scheme, which doctors and members of the public can report to, but I would like to echo the calls from the Sling the Mesh campaign and others to follow the example of Denmark and Sweden and make it mandatory for all healthcare professionals to report suspected adverse reactions. Next, I'd like to turn to the MHRA's failure to act promptly on evidence of adverse reactions. We've seen this historically, such as in the case of sodium valproate, which was known to cause harm to unborn babies in the 1980s. And yet the MHRA did not establish a valproate pregnancy prevention plan until 2018. The known harms to unborn babies were allowed to persist for over 30 years. And more recently, in 2021, we saw how slowly the MHRA reacted to strong signals that there was a serious problem with the AstraZeneca vaccine causing an autoimmune condition called vaccine-induced thrombotic thrombocytopenia. Denmark and other European countries suspended the vaccine for all age groups on the 11th of March 2021. The MHRA, by contrast, only started to restrict the vaccine in some age groups nearly 2 months later on the 7th of May. And yet, there was a signal in the yellow card reports as early as the 8th of February. How many people were needlessly exposed to a risk?
Well,
I will indeed.
I'm very grateful. I think she's hit on a really important point. And what action did the MHRA take to apologise or explain its failure to give adequate and timely warnings to potential patients?
I don't believe they have, and we're probably still waiting for those. And this hopefully will come out. It's not just that, it's also the compensation scheme that these people aren't either getting quickly enough, or whether it's commensurate with actually the illness and damage that has been caused to them. I think it's also worth noting what happened when the Daily Telegraph reported on this potential causal link between the AstraZeneca vaccine and blood clots in March 2021. The journalist who wrote the story received a threatening call from the MHRA warning that the Telegraph would be banned from future briefings and press notices if they did not soften the news. An extremely defensive approach for an agency whose number one strategic objective is to maintain public trust through transparency and proactive communication. Does this sound like an agency that it's doing its best to maintain public trust, let alone patient safety? It's clear the system doesn't work. We have good evidence that suspected adverse reactions are underreported, but what about the ones that are reported? Well, we know from Freedom of Information requests that MHRA does not hold a process for the investigation and follow-up of individual yellow card reports. We know that retrieval of follow-up information from the yellow card database still requires manual extraction, and we also know that only 54% of deaths reported as possibly linked to the exposure of one of the COVID-19 vaccines were followed up by the MHRA. Extremely worrying, or as Matt Hancock infamously described it in a 2021 WhatsApp, shonky. And the Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, replied to that WhatsApp message saying the system needs to get better. Another long-standing problem at the MHRA is their lack of transparency. Take FOIs to the agency as an example. Between 2008 and 2017, only 41% of requests were successful. And in 2021, 76% were answered outside the 20 working day statutory response time. A culture of delay, secrecy has emerged, and MHRA's behaviour around the Commission on Human Medicine meetings for COVID-19 Vaccine Benefit Risk Expert Working Group show this beyond any doubt. Minutes of these meetings were published just last month, 4 years after the meeting took place. Why the delay? And they're stuffed full of redactions, which leaves us with many more questions than answers, particularly as to why these new vaccines were continually described as safe and effective. In the meeting on the 18th of November 2020, the expert working group asks if Pfizer were required to respond to the 36 questions asked by MHRA. And in response, the MHRA confirmed there is no formal obligation to reply. Why is there no formal obligation to reply? Surely it is essential when making such an important decision as whether to allow a new vaccine to be rolled out to the nation, we need those replies. The minutes don't specify the 36 questions, and indeed they don't appear to have been mentioned again. I asked a written question last week to see if, in the spirit of openness and transparency, the MHRA would publish these questions and any answers received from Pfizer. The response, the MHRA does not intend to publish these questions or any subsequent responses. Why not? Isn't this a matter for public interest? These issues weren't resolved before the MHRA gave the green light to start the vaccination to the nation. Particularly worrying is the issue of lymphopenia, where your blood doesn't have enough white blood cells, which was reported in phase 1 of the trials and then goes away. Not because they fixed the problem, but because testing for the condition was not conducted in phase 2 and phase 3. In summary, the failure to act on the weaknesses of the MHRA will only lead to more harm and further damage to the public's trust in the pharmaceuticals agency and those tasked with regulating them. My hope is that this debate helps bring these wide-ranging issues further to the light and focuses the Minister's mind on finding solutions. And finally, I'd like to end on the words of Dr. Tom Jefferson of the University of Oxford. You cannot support both secrecy and vaccination. Requesting data is not a sign of being against drugs or vaccines. It shows that you are in favour of transparency. Those who try to keep data confidential and criticise those who ask for evidence are anti an evidence-based approach. How can you have informed consent if you don't know precisely what is happening? I will indeed.
On that point, will my right honourable friend accept that one of the consequences of the lack of transparency has been a public distrust of vaccines, which is rapidly spreading and has got the consequence that, for example, MMR vaccines, there's not much less take-up than there should be and used to be, and that's because of a lack of trust in the system.
My honourable friend makes a very good point there. If people lose trust in vaccines, if they lose trust in the pharmaceutical industry, if they lose trust in the regulatory agency, this is precisely what happens, and we know those vaccines are essential to many people, and that is not what we want to happen. We just want to make sure that new vaccines, new medicines coming to use are thoroughly tested, and along the way we keep an overall watch that they are working correctly.
To Graham Stringer. Oh, forgive me. The question is as on the order paper. I come to Graham Stringer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the Right Honourable Lady, and I agree with every word she says, and it's late in the day for Thursday, and I will try not to repeat many of the pieces of evidence and arguments that she has given, but they're all valuable contributions to this debate. I want to start by talking first about members of Parliament, politicians' attitude to regulation in general. Some time ago, quite a long time ago, I had responsibility in the Cabinet Office for dealing with better regulations, and I travelled around the country looking at businesses who complained about regulations, seeing how those regulations could be made better. It's 18 months of my life I will never get back, but I came to a number of conclusions after that. Politicians have a knee-jerk reaction when it comes to regulation. If a child dies, there's a fire, there's a disaster of some sort, there is a cry from both sides of the House for more regulation. Not necessarily better regulation, more regulation. Not necessarily better enforcement, because in many cases the regulations are already there. The inspections haven't taken place and enforcement hasn't taken place. But people ask for, or politicians ask for more regulation. The other knee-jerk response, which my government is giving at the moment, is to say regulations are burdensome, so we will try and get rid of them, some of them. I don't think either of those responses really deal with the issue. We have set up regulators, and we're talking about MHRA this afternoon. But by and large, MPs, ministers, once they are set up, they abdicate responsibility and don't look at them until there is a crisis. When I had the responsibility, I went to see the European Medicines Agency before, this was some time before we left the EU, and one of the surprising, and maybe not surprising, things I found, that I was the only minister who had been anywhere near the place. It was the major European agency that this country got after the Maastricht Treaty. It had wide-ranging and important powers, both to deal in the market and to deal with regulation. But nobody bothered with it. If there'd been a crisis, there would have been a queue of ministers, shadow ministers, queuing up to go there. So I think if there is a lesson, and particularly about MHRA, it is we should be looking at regulators, whether it's water regulators, medicine regulators, all the time. We cannot, as a government, as MPs, abdicate our responsibility, because we then come to a crisis and the electorate say, what are you doing? And the answer is, not a lot, we've passed that on. And they may be like water regulators, like the Right Honourable Lady showed, like the medical regulators, they might be pretty useless. And we should be looking at those regulators all the time. Now, partly because of that experience, when I was a member of the Science and Technology Committee in 2012, and partly because there was a lot of press discussion and debate about metal hips that were squeaking and not working very well when they'd been implanted into people, and breast implants that were falling apart and potentially damaging and poisoning the people who'd had the breast implants. We had an inquiry which reported in October 2012, and I will read out some of the comments from the witnesses we took, because they are repeated now about the MHRA. When it came, it's very similar to the Right Honourable lady said about their response. They're secretive, they're slow. When it came to the metal hips, for instance, there was evidence that there were problems with metal hips from 4 years before the MHRA took any action whatsoever. So what is that? 14 years later nearly, they're still with the same problems. Let me read out... when it came to the metal hips, I asked Dr. Hennigan from the evidence-based medicine unit at Oxford University, who had authorised the metal hips. And his answer was extraordinary. He said, nobody knows. I don't know. Nobody knows. Now, it was a different regulatory regime then, because we were part of the European Union. So anybody that had the competence, or at least the authority, in any country in the EU could give authority. But nobody knew which body had done it and whether that body was composed of competent people and what evidence they'd used to do that. But the MHRA, when they found out, did nothing for 4 years. So that's disgraceful, and there are all sorts of comments which I can give you from Dr. Stephen O'Connor from the Institute of Physical Engineering. Said they were overly bureaucratic relative to other competent bodies and inefficient and difficult to deal with. Well, the Right Honourable Lady showed they don't answer FOI requests and they don't tell us what's going on. The Lancet said, when it came to the breast implants, which I'll talk about next, that they were in paralysis. MHRA were in paralysis and need of reform. Again, a long time ago. When it came to it was a different issue with the breast implants because they were dealing with a fraudulent product. The products that had been authorised were not the products that were being sold to surgeons to be implanted in women. But the committee asked that there should be random and regular testing of the bodies who were responsible for manufacturing those bodies, and I'd like to ask the Minister, I don't expect her to know, but I would like to, not at this time, if she could look and check whether the authorities have done any of those randomised tests on the bodies that manufacture implants on people. So that's the history. The Right Honourable Lady from Tatton basically has analysed what's going on now, but I'd just like to talk about what we learnt during the COVID period. We learnt that the NHS, many of its constituent parts, not the clinicians, were secretive. And we talked earlier in the chamber today about the government's response to the first part of the COVID inquiry. I don't think what that inquiry is getting to at the present time is part of what went wrong during COVID was the fact that the NHS didn't tell us what was going on. There was also a restriction on political debate. And we need, in any crisis, and in the regular turn of events outside a crisis, if we're to get the best policies, then there needs to be transparency, so we know how things can be improved, we know what we can criticise. And the Right Honourable Lady made the excellent point that keeping things secret actually encourages those people who don't trust vaccines, who have odd theories about how society is controlled. It encourages those people not to take protections from vaccines. We know that no medicine is 100% safe. There is no point in pretending that they are safe. Vaccines have saved many, many lives over decades. More than decades, over a century. And it is good for society, good for individuals, that people understand that. And they will be less trusting if we don't tell them what's going on. I mean, as recently as a few minutes ago, I got an email telling me that the Health Security Agency is still refusing to release the cost of bird flu vaccines that they've purchased. What can be the possible reason for not saying how public money has been spent on a good cause? Having vaccines ready for any flu epidemic is a good thing. It saves people. We've been talking about that. Why should it be kept secret? And I'd like the Minister as well to respond to that if she could. In turning, and again it's a phrase the Right Honourable Lady used, from a watchdog to an enabler, is there any member in this House who thinks that's a good idea, or even knows what it means, or what is being enabled? I certainly don't know what is being enabled, but I think one of the things we should remember is the MRSA and the whole of the health industry are swimming in a sea of pharmaceutical sharks, really. Pharmaceutical companies produce some extraordinarily wonderful products that keep us safe. They also produce huge profits, and sometimes they get their products onto the market by telling lies, or certainly by sins of omission. Everybody knows about the thalidomide case and how long it took to get compensation for the victims of thalidomide, how long it took to prove it. But I just, almost at random, picked out a number of, well, two other cases. GSK with paroxetine, I think that's how you pronounce it. They held back information that, because they didn't put forward the tests that didn't show a positive benefit, they also kept back the tests that showed that paroxetine enhanced the chances of children committing suicide. And they did, and it took a lot of investigation to get that.
Mr. Stroud, I assume you're coming to a conclusion soon?
I am. I've got
Marvellous.
one sentence. I'm
Marvellous.
sorry. I didn't realise I'd been speaking so long. I'm sorry. The last thing I was going to say was reproproxetine is another example where the information given out because to doctors was inadequate because they didn't show negative tests. I use those two examples basically to show that the MRSA should not be enabling these things. It should be much more vigilant. It should be asking for powers to demand the right to know all information that drug companies have before it makes, before it says those drugs are as safe as they can be. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
To enable us to get everybody in, hopefully everyone's contributions, we'll be mindful about the next speaker, and I call Sir Christopher Chope. Sir Christopher Chope.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I shall try and be brief. Can I follow the Honourable Gentleman by referring to a quote from the Hayek's book, The Road to Serfdom? I don't claim the credit for identifying this myself, but actually it was quoted in the other place yesterday, or on the 15th of January, in the context of the Football Governance Bill by the noble Lord Lorne Hannon of Kingsclere, because he was talking about the growth of the administrative state, about which the Honourable Gentleman was speaking at the beginning of his speech. And he says this is what Hayek said: the delegation of particular tasks to separate bodies, while a regular feature, is yet only the first step to the process by which a democracy ... relinquishes its powers. And that's in chapter 5 of The Road to Serfdom in 1944. So not much has changed, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is what happens. The MHRA is an example of what happens if we in this House transfer responsibility to unelected, unaccountable organisations. It so happens that tomorrow on the order paper is the COVID-19 vaccine damage bill. And that bill is supported not just by me, but also by my right honourable friend, who is from a former Attorney General. And that bill calls for an independent review of COVID-19 vaccine damage. It calls on the Secretary of State to appoint a current or former High Court judge to lead an independent review of disablement caused by COVID-19 vaccinations administered in the United Kingdom and the adequacy of the compensation offered to persons so disabled. We know, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there are already over 600 people who have actually been told by the agency responsible at the Department of Health that they have suffered disabilities as a result of COVID-19 vaccines, and a large number of them where the disability is in excess of 60% have been awarded some payments, £120,000 each, wholly derisory. But what my bill goes on to say is that the review must consider the rates and extent of disablement caused by each type of COVID-19 vaccination offered in the United Kingdom. And what is relevant to this debate is it must also consider the effectiveness of Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency monitoring of such side effects and National Health Service and government responses to such monitoring, as well as the adequacy of compensation offered to people who are disabled. There has always been an agreement, basically, that people who undertake vaccination voluntarily or have in receipt of other medical products, that if they do the right thing by the country at large, then if something goes wrong for them and they get an adverse reaction, then if there's causation is established, then they will be able to look to the government or the taxpayer to pay them some recompense under the scheme to which I've referred. That trust built upon that scheme has been undermined by, first of all, the denial of the previous government and to an extent the current one for a long time, a denial that there had been any adverse reactions caused by the COVID-19 vaccines other than the most minor disablement. But also it's been undermined by the fact that so many people have applied for a review of their cases, and some people now, I think over 1,000, have been waiting for more than 18 months before a decision. This shows that this is a very low priority issue for the government, and I hope that when the Minister responds to this debate, and she will be able to explain why the government is going to block my bill again tomorrow, because I would have thought if they were taking this issue seriously as they should be, then they should be open and supportive of the establishment of an independent review of disablement.
We are now setting a 5-minute time limit, and I call Perran.
Whereas, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to start by thanking the Right Honourable Member for Tatton for securing this debate on what is an incredibly important campaign and in support of the reforms to the MHRA. I would like to make clear my interest as an officer of the Primidos APPG. And I'd like to focus on the human case for reform. And if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to share part of a speech delivered at a Primidos APPG meeting recently by Jason Farrell, a journalist who has been instrumental in communicating this campaign for some time and who powerfully put into words the experience of Marie Lyon and other victims. In October 1970, in Billinge maternity ward in Wigan, a woman gives birth to a girl. The baby is quickly rushed out of sight and later brought back swaddled. When Marie Lyon unwraps her daughter, she discovers half her baby's arm is missing. Meanwhile, in Portsmouth, Shirley Gibbons gives birth. Her daughter is so damaged, medics put her in a cupboard, assuming she will be dead within minutes. Shirley's husband demands to see the child and discovers the baby's back is twisted, her face disfigured, and one eye is missing. When she's eventually allowed to see her baby, Shirley reacts in exactly the same way as Marie does. She's beautiful, she's mine. As a relatively new MP, I first met Marie Lyon, campaigner-in-chief and chairwoman of the Association for Children Damaged by Hormone Pregnancy Tests, just a few months ago at the request of a constituent. Marie has met with many MPs in her years of campaigning for recognition and justice for mothers and children affected by hormone pregnancy tests. I had not met many campaigners like her before, and certainly never met a leader with such reserves of stamina and profound sense of injustice. Madam Deputy Speaker, I speak here on the shoulders of victims, families, activists, MPs, scientists and academics who've called for substantial reform of the MHRA and for the government to acknowledge the harm done to patients and to implement the recommendations of the IMMDS. The harrowing stories of victims of this scandal, after decades of fudges, obfuscation and inaction that have hindered their pursuit of justice, must be heard again and again in this chamber. The evidence is clear. The time for talk has long passed. It is time for us to now act.
Danny.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm going to be quick as I can. I want to talk about overprescription and about the vaccines. I've just acknowledged my role as the Deputy Chair, I believe I am, past Chair of the APPG for Beyond Pills, which the Honourable Member for Stroud now chairs in this Parliament, and I thank the Secretariat for that, for the great work they do to support it. We have a crisis of overprescription in our country, and the rates of prescription drugs that are being given to people are going up vertiginously. Prescriptions have doubled over the last 12 years. Nearly 9 million people are on antidepressants, 1 in 5 adults. It is way too high. There are many people who should never have been put on these drugs. They should have been offered non-chemical alternatives, and they should be supported to withdraw. And I very much hope that the MHRA and the government more widely will heed the calls that we're making on the APPG for better training of GPs, better labelling of these drugs and withdrawal services for people who want to come off them. In addition to social prescribing, which I'm sure the member for Stroud will talk about from his experience, I just want to mention the important potential role of digital therapeutics, which at the moment are not properly commissioned by the NHS, but could be a big part of the answer. I want to talk briefly about the role of the MHRA in overprescription, particularly with respect to antidepressants. And we know from evidence, from anecdote, from coroner's reports that SSRIs, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, can cause people to take their own lives. And there are dozens of documented cases. Most prominently recently is the tragic case of Thomas Kingston, whom I knew, and whose family I've been speaking to since his death. Tom shot himself last February after being put on SSRIs. In fact, being put on an SSRI after another SSRI caused him to feel absolutely awful. So he was put on 2 in very quick succession. The coroner for Gloucestershire, who conducted the inquest, has recommended much clearer communication of the risks of these pills. And she's not the first coroner to make this recommendation. I pay tribute to the Times newspaper for their campaigning to highlight the fact that so many of the inquest reports, so many coroner's reports have not been heeded by the authorities. And I wish they had been. It might well have saved many lives. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me move on quickly now.
Can I
have it take an intervention.
This withdrawal coming off those antidepressants, SSRIs, the number of people who have taken the lives, it isn't a one-off, it isn't rare. There are many people. I brought an incident of one of my constituents, aged only 25, who took her life as well. So I congratulate the Honourable Member for bringing this forward and ask him what more we can do to raise awareness of withdrawal from these antidepressants.
I'm very grateful. The tragedies that we are reading about and that we all hear about are, I'm glad to say, bringing to light the chronic problem that we have of overprescription in our society. And I'm afraid to say the MHRA is to blame here, because at the moment, so far, and I'm glad to say a review is underway, but they do not sufficiently recognise the direct harms that these pills can induce in people. And I hope that through better labelling, a better regulation and a better culture of alternative prescriptions, we can reduce the tragedies that we're getting so familiar with. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me quickly make a comment or two, following on from my right honourable friend for Christchurch talking about the experience of the MHRA during the COVID epidemic. The fact is the vaccines were developed at a frantic rate. We can be very impressed by the speed of the task force and pay tribute to the work of the private sector, particularly in our world-leading research base. The fact is government did manage to act at great speed, largely because it bypassed Whitehall. But there do remain these very significant questions which the right honourable gentleman raises about whether the vaccines are genuinely safe and effective. And I think it is right for people to ask questions about the data on excess deaths and wonder if there is a connection with the vaccine. This is not an inappropriate question. Ultimately, there's only one way to answer that question, and that is to have the data. And the fact is we don't have access to the data which exists, which the government holds, and which extraordinarily the government has made available to the pharmaceutical companies who produce the vaccines, but is not made available to researchers. I mean individual level death data showing who was dosed with what vaccines and which of them died. And in a debate in this House last April and previously in correspondence with ministers, I clearly and simply asked for this data to be made available to researchers, anonymised as appropriate. And the UK Health Security Agency has admitted this data exists, but has refused to release it, almost unbelievably, because of the risk to the mental health of the relatives of the dead. So this obviously begs the question, does the data then show there is a link between the vaccines and these deaths? The Information Tribunal is due to rule on this shortly, and I fervently hope that we will see common sense prevail and the data can be made available and that our minds can be put at rest and those of our constituents can be put at rest to disprove the link. And there's also a case with the Information Tribunal about the data held by the MHRA on the vaccine safety with respect to pregnant women. Again, the agency has been withholding this data for 2 years. So I'll finish there, Madam Deputy Speaker, by observing, in light of the comments made by honourable friends across the House, we have a genuine problem with the regulation of the medical industry and of medical products, and I very much hope that this government, I welcome very much the appointment of R.F. Kennedy to the role of Health Secretary in the United States. He's going to shake things up over there. Maybe the Minister can be our own RFK over here and bring some genuine transparency to the health system.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Honourable Member for Tatton for securing this very important debate today. I'm very happy to be called to speak on such an important issue. As Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on First Do No Harm, I'm very interested in the need for MHRA reform in the context of Mesh, Primados and Valparaiso scandals. However, for time's sake today, I will focus my remarks on MHRA reform and the mesh scandal in particular, not least because the Honourable Lady, the member for Tatton, has opened the debate so well, and I know my honourable friend, the member for Bolton South and Walkden, will be speaking particularly about the Primados scandal, so I don't want to steal any of her thunder when it comes. I want to start by paying tribute to all the campaigners we've worked with over so many years on the First Do No Harm report scandals, especially Kath Sansom from Sling the Mesh, Mary Lyon, who's been mentioned from the Primados campaign, and Janet Williams and Emma Murphy from the Valparade campaign. I also must pay tribute to my honourable friend who recently retired from the other place, Baroness Cumberledge, author of the Independent Medicines and Medical Devices Safety Review and the ex-co-chair of the First Do No Harm All-Party Group. She has been a great support to me over the years, thanks to her invaluable hard work highlighting key recommendations to prevent future health scandals, including vital MHRA reform. We know what we need to do. Now we must get on with the job. So, as we've heard, colleagues here today are in agreement that MHRA is in need of urgent and substantial reform. One area in particular is the need for mandatory reporting of adverse events to the yellow card by healthcare professionals. Contrary to responses I've received when I've asked questions on this topic in the House, which argue that the current system works, it does not. It is broken. Let me be clear, the current voluntary system, which doctors are enjoy, enabling them to choose whether or not to log side effects and complications to the MHRA yellow card, is simply unacceptable. This voluntary system has led to many adverse events going unreported. This must be made mandatory. But this fix alone will not work if the data is there but is not used. This information must be tracked and assessed in real time by the MHRA in order to spot trends of harm so treatments can be stopped immediately if needed to prevent the repetition of mistakes and in turn prevent their escalation into further health scandals, as we have seen with Mesh, Valparate and Primados. Comparison of datasets conducted by Sling the Mesh found that a whopping 2/3 of mesh complications, some as serious as slicing into bladders, bowels or through vaginal walls, were not logged by healthcare professionals to the MHRA yellow card. If these excruciating examples are not interpreted by healthcare professionals as worthy of reporting, what reason do we have to trust that healthcare treatments are safe? We need to see MHRA at the heart of patient safety, properly and efficiently regulating and recording, not just nodding treatments through like a tick box exercise. Mesh, for example, was allowed from the 1990s onwards on the basis that it was equivalent to hernia mesh. Without any post-market surveillance by the MHRA, it was allowed to be aggressively sold free rein in the UK. This ultimately led to thousands of women, including my very own mum, being irreversibly harmed. Had reporting been mandatory, the sheer scale of women impacted could have at least been reduced through spotting a clear pattern of harm and putting a stop to it. It is clear that we need to change the current system, and fast. Women's voices, all of these scandals, mostly today we're talking about, affect women. So women's voices must be taken seriously. We should not have to wait until media coverage publicly shames health scandals or documentaries force accountability and answers upon us. The MHRA needs to be functioning and not just responding to treatments causing harm, but regulating and preventing them in the first place. Surely this is the absolute least we should expect from a regulation agency that is supposed to ensure the safety and effectiveness of patients and the medicines and medical devices that they receive. Hence, first do no harm.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I should start by alerting people to my declared interests relating to the pharmaceutical industry. All of us familiar with the growth of the Quango will be aware of how these unelected, unaccountable organisations have come to control and dominate British public life. Not us, the democratically elected members, but the Quangos. Failure is rewarded, never punished. No organisation encapsulates that point as comprehensively as the MHRA, the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. Their role is essentially to ensure that medicines and medical devices are safe and effective. Where have we heard those words before? How can they possibly be trusted to regulate properly when they are largely funded by the companies that they are tasked to regulate? It's simply human nature for a conflict like this to impact on the decision-making process. The MHRA's biggest challenge in its history was the COVID response. It failed. It enabled the biggest assault on civil liberties and economic prosperity in my lifetime, lockdown. The greatest scandal of them all. It was quite simply the most disgraceful period of recent history. The MHRA's insistence on vaccines for all enabled lockdown restrictions to continue for as long as they did. They must take part responsibility for the consequences. Vast NHS backlogs, rife mental health issues, soaring alcohol-related deaths, obesity booming, children's development wrecked, long-term illnesses mounting, increased substance abuse, domestic violence on the rise, unnoticed child neglect, fathers missing the birth of their children, and elderly loved ones left to rot and die alone. We weren't even allowed to properly mourn the dead. The wicked list is endless. None of it was based on any science, certainly not vaccinating almost the entire population, including disgracefully young children. This was a hideous dereliction of duty from the MHRA. It's not just children they forced the COVID vaccination on, tens of millions who had absolutely no need for it whatsoever. And there was clear risk from taking the vaccine. Not just the initial 2 doses, but the booster following that. The evidence was simply not there. Particularly considering that by this stage almost the entire population had actually caught the virus, which gave far more effective natural protection than any man-made intervention. The MHRA knew that, but failed to act. Why? Political pressure, not to undermine the wretched COVID response? Had they been honest about the real need, or lack of it, for population-wide vaccinations, the whole case for lockdown collapses. As of the 4th of November, there have been 489,991 adverse reaction reports for COVID-19 vaccines in the UK. This is just the reported issues. What is the true number? When individual after individual reports feeling far worse following taking the vaccine than they ever did after the virus, should we not question whether that vaccination was necessary? The MHRA failed. This was not a vaccine that was needed for the entire population. It simply wasn't. We were fed the lie that through taking the jab, it would protect vulnerable loved ones. That was disgraceful dishonesty. The vaccine did not prevent transmission. We know that now, and we knew that then. It should always have been a fully free and informed choice. If an elderly man in his 90s believes that the virus poses more of a threat than the vaccine, then let him take it. For almost everyone under 70, that was a risk analysis which fell firmly in the camp of not having the vaccine. Don't even get me started on the abhorrent vaccine passport policy, one of the most evil policies devised by government in living memory. The MHRA should have provided full and transparent data so that the educated adults could make their own decisions for themselves and for their families. It must act as an independent barrier against both political expedience and corporate profit, protecting public health above all else. The question is, who regulates the regulator? Who protects against regulatory capture? How did the MHRA allow politicians, celebrities and even their own agency to describe these vaccines as safe and effective when yellow card data clearly shows it's not universally safe and certainly not universally effective? How could MHRA CEO June Rain say she had transformed the MHRA from a watchdog to an enabler of the pharmaceutical industry? An oxymoron for a watchdog who is meant to safeguard public health. It's Parliament's duty to now exercise its sovereign power to ensure that we learn from the myriad of mistakes. Thank you.
Rooms are going to 4 minutes, and I call Dr. Simon Opher.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've got quite a lot to say here, but I shall squeeze it into 4 minutes. First of all, having a regulator funded by a drug company is genuinely marking your own homework, and we need to change that straight away. So I think we need a reform from there. I would also say from clinical experience that the yellow card system does work, but we never get any feedback from it. And that's one of the problems. And the other problem is, clinically, often you're not sure whether it's an adverse effect or not. So we need a very easy system that can be just fired off, low white blood cells, as you were saying. Is that a reaction? And then when a number of different doctors get it, we can then accumulate that information. Can I just say a few things about vaccination? Vaccinations save far, far more lives than it caused damage. Now, every medicine that's ever been invented has side effects, and I do not deny the vaccine side effects. However, it saved hundreds of thousands of lives. When we were injecting, I ran the COVID vaccination service in our area in Dursley, and at the height of the epidemic, of the pandemic, if we injected 180 people over 80, we saved a life. Now, that is incredible compared to the side effect rate, which was incredibly small. It does exist. We need to look at it. But let's not get on the backs of vaccines. Vaccines have saved more lives than anything else. So a couple of things there. I actually did really want to talk about antidepressants, and the Honourable Member for East Wiltshire has already said a few words there. We do have a problem with overprescribing in this country. 8.7 million people are on antidepressants, and I noticed my honourable friend also saying about paroxetine causing increased risks of suicide. So we need to wean ourselves off medications. NICE guidelines say that mild to moderate depression, we should not start tablets, and yet they are started. And that's because people have come a bit over-medicalised. We have 10-minute appointments, and also we have no psychological therapies. And what we must really take use of here is something called social prescriptions, which are available to the NHS, where we can prescribe to patients something which isn't medical. We need to demedicalise what's going on. Now, this can include lots and lots of different things. Exercise, it can include being very creative. And in fact, yesterday I went with the Lord Mayor of Westminster to St John's Wood Library with Lou Jackson about comedy on prescription. And this is making people laugh can avoid them needing medications. So we need to look at these things much more seriously and get people off tablets. Now, the other thing I'd like to say, and as the Right Honourable Member for Tatton was indicating, one of her constituents took their own lives when they were trying to get off antidepressant medication. And I think the MHRA need to put warnings around this on the packet, and they have failed to do so. And what we also need is we need a support mechanism for people coming off these tablets. Of the 8 million people on antidepressants, about 2 million are trying to get off them. It's a major problem. GPs actually aren't that well informed about this. There's some very strong Maudsley guidelines based around micro-tapering, so people can come off slowly and safely. And I would say that something like a support service might have helped your constituent and stopped them taking their own lives. So in conclusion, we've got a pandemic of overprescription in this country, and we need to start looking at it. As chair of the APPG for Beyond Pills, and with the Honourable Member for East Wiltshire with me, we are trying to reduce prescriptions and make it safe for people to come off antidepressants. Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Mohamed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Before being elected to this House, I worked for nearly 20 years in the pharmaceutical regulation and compliance industry, and I know from first-hand experience the critical role that the MHRA must play in protecting the public and its indispensable role in ensuring public trust in the medical sector. My comments therefore come from a place of wanting to ensure that trust, so painstakingly built up, continues to be strengthened. A recent survey by the Association of British Pharmaceutical Industry found 80% of respondents felt the MHRA's lack of capacity was undermining the industry trust and deterring domestic investment, problems compounded by Brexit, which have created obstacles to cooperation in the EU. Faced with a large backlog of clinical trial applications, you would imagine the obvious solution is to make more resources available to recruit and train new staff and to rebuild relationships with our European partners. However, the Prime Minister seems more determined to demonstrate his commitment to slashing red tape and the need to, as he says, regulate smartly and regulate creatively. I must admit I get very nervous when I hear this kind of language used in relation to the pharmaceutical industry because it is normally code for measures that threaten safety standards even further. Madam Deputy Speaker, the need for openness, transparency and regulation is probably greater than ever before. Recently, I've had constituents raise with me why the animal feed additive Bovaer given to cows to reduce methane is not tested or approved to MHRA pharmaceutical standards, and why it's not even listed on milk cartons. I've had constituents raise concerns about the use of carcinogenic chemicals in our foods. For example, we know there are a whole host of chemicals banned from being used in food in the EU that are permitted in the US. It is perfectly understandable that amidst the bonfire of red tape this government is planning to set light, people would fear some of those which better protect us might go up in smoke. I've also had constituents raise questions about the latest impact of the COVID vaccines. Madam Deputy Speaker, before anyone starts accusing me of being an anti-vaxxer, I took both COVID vaccines and agree they saved many lives. But it is also the case some legitimate concerns have been voiced about long-term side effects. We now know that in the largest vaccine study to date, 2 very rare COVID-19 vaccine side effects, a neurological disorder and inflammation of the spinal cord, have been detected. Other studies have confirmed side effects including inflammation of the heart muscle and the lining around the heart, particularly in young males, as well as blood clots in the brain's venous system. Today we stand united in our commitment to safeguarding the health and well-being of our citizens. The motion before us highlights critical issues with the MHRA that demand our immediate attention and action. The Independent Medicines and Medical Device Safety Review has shed light on the persistent and exacerbating patient safety concerns since its publication in 2020. It is our duty to ensure that the MHRA undergoes substantial revision to address these issues. The safety of our citizens must be paramount, and we cannot afford to overlook the shortcomings that have been identified. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, let us not forget that our primary responsibility is to the people we serve. We must act with urgency and determination to rectify these issues with the MHRA. By implementing these recommendations, we can work towards a safer, more responsive healthcare system that prioritises patient safety and trust above corporate profits and interests. Thank you.
Neil Duncan-Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Right Honourable Member for Tatton for securing this important debate. My interest in this issue stems from the fact that one of my constituents, Barbara Manning, was affected by Primados, and along with the tireless campaigner Marie Lyon, who's been referenced earlier by members, has been seeking justice ever since. For members who don't know, between 1958 and 1978, Primados was a hormone pregnancy test that was given to about 1.5 million women in the form of pills. It was taken off the market in 1978 amid concerns about the effect on unborn child of those who were pregnant, but the link has never been formally recognised by regulators or the manufacturer. Some research at the time suggested there might be an association between drug and miscarriages, babies born with shortened limbs, abnormalities in their internal organs, brain damage and heart defects. Many of these children died before reaching adulthood, and of those still alive, some are blind, deaf and brain damaged. In 2017, a report of an expert working group of the UK Commission on Human Medicines concluded there was no causal association between Primados and severe disabilities in babies, but there are very real concerns as to the conflict of interests between some of those on the expert working group and their connections to the big pharmaceutical companies involved in the scandal. On the 8th of July 2020, Baroness Cumberledge published her in-depth findings into how the health system responds to reports from patients about harmful side effects from medicines and medical devices. On the MHRA, she said this: a regulator must work both for patients and with patients. This hasn't been the case in the past. We are recommending that the regulator of medicines and medical devices is overhauled. It needs to change and radically improve the way that concerns about medicines and devices are detected and acted upon. The regulation of devices in particular needs urgent change. The MHRA needs to engage more with patients and track how medicines and devices improve or fail to improve patients' health and quality of life. It needs to raise public awareness of its role, and it needs to ensure that patients have a core role in its work. The review also concluded the state and manufacturers have a moral responsibility to provide ex gratia payments to those families who have experienced avoidable harm due to their failure to remove Primados from the market. The duty of the regulator, Madam Deputy Speaker, was to protect women. They chose to protect the manufacturer instead. Thousands of women and unborn children were exposed to a risk which was widely acknowledged at the time. This should not have happened. It now falls to us to put right that injustice, to persuade the manufacturer to pay compensation to those affected families and reform the regulatory system so that it protects patients in the future.
Final backbench contribution, Yasmin Qureshi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My interest in this matter arises as the chair of the APPG on Primados, and it's a campaign that myself and many other MPs have been doing for the last 12 years. During the course of our campaign, on one occasion, after a big debate, the Minister ordered an expert working group to be looked at by the MHRA. The MHRA is supposed to examine the evidence. We, the campaigners and the members of Parliament, thought that all the documents that we had would be looked at by the MHRA, but clearly it was clear that they did not look at our documents. And in fact, they were supposed to engage with the victims and their families, and even they were not spoken to or dealt with properly, or no thorough examination made. In fact, what we had is that members of the MHRA, which was set up by the Commission on Human Medicine, some of them had connection with pharmaceutical companies. What we wanted the MHRA to look at was the actual documents. The documents showed very clearly that many years ago, in the 70s, it was accepted by the then Committee on Medicine that this drug was causing deformities. However, the man in charge of the Patient Safety Commission, in fact, colluded with the manufacturers and hid the evidence, actually destroyed the evidence, and in fact refused to help. And then there are documents that we have which show that they knew there was a cover-up, the manufacturers knew there was a cover-up, and yet the MHRA refused and did not look at all those documents. Subsequently, Professor Carl Hennigan from Oxford University looked at the same material that the EWG had looked at and came to a completely different conclusion. He said the documents and the evidence that they had actually showed there was a connection. The other error that they made was very clear. They were asked to look at the issue of whether there was a connection, causal connection or not, and they changed their recommendations again. Now, the former Prime Minister, Mrs. May, was also not convinced by the expert working group, and we persuaded her to ask for a review by Baroness Cumberledge. Baroness Cumberledge is the one who then, in her review, said that there was avoidable harm and that the victims of this should be compensated. Now, throughout the whole years, the government of the day did not want to communicate with us. They have not been dealing with this issue properly. They have relied always on the expert working group's report, which is the one that has held the victims back. It's even held us back from pursuing a possible legal claim. What we say to the government now, that EWG report needs to be looked at, that Professor Carl Hennison's study of it also should be looked at. And more recently, there has been scientific evidence that has been produced, which we have sent to the Commission on Human Medicine for the department to look at, which will show, in fact, experimental zebrafish, that there is a link between this drug. And remember, this drug is 40 times 40 times the strength of the morning after pill. So just imagine when women were given this pill, which had no effect other than to see if they were pregnant, and the damage it caused. So what I would ask the Minister here today, with the new government in place, that please relook at this whole thing, and please, the EWG report set up by the MHRA has been discredited. Please stop listening to it.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Alison Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I would like to begin by thanking the Honourable Member for Tatton for bringing this really important debate today, and for her excellent opening speech, which I thought was very informative. In the interest of time, I'm going to limit my remarks compared to what I was planning to say. And so I will begin by saying that the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency is tasked with vital work, and it's there to protect and promote public health, as we all agree. And it's concerning that despite its obvious importance, it clearly, as members who've made their speech this afternoon have set out, it clearly faces a number of challenges that need to be addressed. The Cumberland Review highlighted the conflicts of interest, that the MHRA relies on fee income from pharmaceutical companies. And as the Honourable Member for Stroud said, this is really a case of marking their own homework. It's not a great way to set up its funding. And then the Honourable Member for Dewsbury and Batley made a really important really important point. It's almost like the elephant in the room. As with so many parts of our economy, Brexit caused major disruption to the pharmaceutical industry. Among other things, the loss of the prestigious European Medicines Agency, the EMA, from London to Amsterdam damaged trust in the UK's pharmaceutical investment space badly. And in the interest of time, no, I won't. And it caused significant confusion for companies looking to sell products from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. It has also slowed down the time in which novel medicines and treatments can be approved for use as pharmaceutical companies have understandably prioritised obtaining a single approval, allowing access to 27 markets via the EMA. Meanwhile, strict affordability models imposed by the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence mean that companies face a further hurdle before their product can reach patients, again diminishing the attractiveness of the UK market post-Brexit. To help address this, the MHRA introduced the International Recognition Procedure a year ago to streamline the authorisation process by incorporating assessments from trusted regulatory partners worldwide, including the EMA. But this is reliant on those partners having already approved the product, so UK patients will inevitably still have access to medicines later than other countries, including the EU. When I met Roche Diagnostics, based in Burgess Hill in my constituency, they told me about serious industry concerns that the additional GB-specific conformity checks required could be prohibitively expensive and lead to significant delays. As things stand, the forecast is looking gloomy. My Liberal Democrat colleagues and I are committed to addressing these issues head-on and helping the MHRA become world-leading. We are pushing to, first, expand the MHRA's capacity, halving the time for treatments to reach patients suffering from illnesses like cancer. Second, fully implement the recommendations of the Cumberland Review, including compensation, corrective surgery and psychological support for those who have failed and suffered from faulty devices and drugs. Okay. And third, and this is vital, Madam Deputy Speaker, actively seek a comprehensive mutual recognition agreement with the EMA to promote faster access to new and novel medicines and medical devices. This would reduce red tape, cost and friction, providing hope for those who need access to these life-saving and life-enhancing medicines and devices. Thank you.
I call the Shadow Minister, Dr. Luke Evans.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I congratulate the Member of Tatton on securing this debate and giving members from across the House to raise issues from Primodos, breast implants, MES, SSRIs, vaccines and MMR. And as a clinician, I have seen patients that have had all of these issues and know just the heartfelt difficulties they have, not only in what's happened to them, but trying to resolve those issues. And it's a testament to her to give the House the chance to debate these issues. And I'm not sure the public have ever paid so much attention to a regulator, ever. Even in the financial crisis, the MHRA has suddenly become something that people know. And I often used to explain to patients, when it comes to what is a regulator, they should be like a good referee. You shouldn't see them, but they should be there to hold people to account, know the rules. But in modern refereeing, it's even more than that. They've already met the players beforehand. They're speaking to the public about how things work, and they're helping to shape the way in which the rules should be interpreted, and we improve the game. In answer to the question from the member from Great Yarmouth, who regulates the regulators? This House. This House is who is accountable for it, and we need to make sure that is key. So what are the functions of the MHRA? Well, they are as follows. To ensure medicines, medical devices and blood components for transfusion meet applicable standards of safety, quality and efficiency. They secure safe supply chains for medicines, medical devices and blood components, promote international standardisation and harmonisation to ensure the effectiveness and safety of biological medicines, educate the public, healthcare professions about the risks and benefits of medicines, medical devices and blood components leading to safer and more effective use, and enable innovation and research to develop that benefits the public health. At this point, I'd like to welcome the new chair, Professor Anthony Harnden, as appointed only literally at the start of the year. I hope he's listening to this debate because it's going to be an important place for him when it comes to him setting his priorities. And actually, I pay testament again to the member for Tatton, because whether the MHRA knew this debate was happening, in my research I noticed that all the websites were updated on their guidance only yesterday on the 15th. So congratulations to either the power of this place or inadvertently nonetheless. The last government did do a lot in this space, particularly focusing around patient safety and access, introducing new regulations, for example, around medical devices. The classic one you'll see is diabetes monitoring. But it also set out to attract innovation, and the reforms have aided to make the UK an attractive market for medical technologies. And I'm pleased both sides of the House agree this is a great place for the UK to have growth. But this was based on consultation-based approach. And this follows the changes that we've had since 2021, when a consultation was taken on the future regulations on medical devices. And that's led to a phased implementation, a proportionate, phased approach to minimise supply disruptions and support the system readiness. And under the last government on the 9th of January 2024, a roadmap of implementation was set out. And again, I'm pleased to see the current government have updated that in December. This has the regulatory aims of adapting new technologies, strengthening patient safety, and providing clarity for manufacturers who are trying to bring products to the market. All of this, all these significant changes, are trying to balance medical technology advances, market capture, patient access, affordability, and clinical outcome. But as we've heard in this debate, this is all very well and good. But perception versus reality comes to mind. Arguably, we have one of the best regulatory regimes in the world, and post-Brexit has been a real opportunity to lead the way. And counter to what the Lib Dem spokesman said, it was because of Brexit we were able to regulate around our vaccines. But as raised today, there are still serious concerns about the system, surveillance and resources giving the medical tech boom. Now, this is a wide debate, so I'm going to try and focus my remarks on three areas: the current medical market, the emerging medical market, and communication with the public and perceptions and beliefs. When it comes to the current system with current medications, we only have to look at what we heard from the back here about SSRIs in particular, and, for example, the impact they have on sexual dysfunction. That's casework that I happen to have on my desk at the moment. So does the government believe the yellow card system works, or will it consider a review into this area? When it comes to the emerging markets, we have to remember the MHRA also holds a statutory role not only in regulating, but the advertising and promotions of medicine in the UK. We've seen thousands of adverts for weight loss injections like Ozempic, which exist online. The Times, for example, finding approximately 6,500 on Meta's ad library mentioning GLP-1 between January 2022 and the end of June 2024. And Sky reported, according to Simple Online Pharmacy, which has access to wholesale figure, 500,000 people in the UK are currently using things like Wegovy. So I'd be grateful if the government could set out what support they're offering the MHRA to ensure that it can fulfil its roles and functions properly, given it has to manage the promotion and safety and supply of all these areas. Are there any plans to conduct a review to see if the MHRA is able to meet these conditions in a changing medical world? And finally, and I think the most importantly, if I was to be critical of the MHRA, I think the key thing that's missed on the objectives, certainly set out by the new chair, is communication. Because I finish where I started. A regulator has never been more in the public's eye. You don't have to tell me as a clinician how difficult it is to wade through the complexity of conflicting data and the opaque nature of it. But as the member for Tatton pointed out, FOIs trying to understand and being transparent are key. Will the government look at a review of how the MHRA interacts with the public, how it communicates with grassroots professionals, and what it can do to explain the hugely important work it has? Because in conclusion, as the member for Christchurch and Dewsbury and Batley pointed out, this is about trust. And I think it was Reagan who said, trust but verify. This seems particularly apt for this debate, for that is the role of a regulator, but also the government and the public. We must build a regulatory system that all can trust and inherently do, but it's easy to verify at any point. And if we can achieve this, we can build a trusted ecosystem that's good for innovation, good for the economy, and most importantly, good for the people.
I call the Minister, Karen Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I really congratulate the Right Honourable Member for Tatton on securing this debate and thank her and all who have spoken in this debate today. And we have heard some powerful stories of failure and some useful experience of colleagues. I particularly highlight the member for Stroud, Dewsbury and Batley, and indeed the opposition spokesperson for the expertise that they have brought. Now, I've heard many of these stories before in my 10 years in this place, as I sadly have also had a constituent whose experience. I'm grateful to her for sharing and others, and frankly shocked me and indeed my staff. And I congratulate the honourable members for Camborne and Redruth, Washington and Gateshead South, and Poole and Bolton South and Walkden, and many others who previously spoke of this debate about bringing those experiences here, shining a light. It's right for us to debate. I'm still learning, Madam Deputy Speaker, 6 months in, so I'm grateful for this afternoon, and I assure the Honourable Member for Blackley and Middleton South that I can't answer everything, and glad he recognised that. The Right Honourable Lady has focused my mind, and I'm grateful for that. If I don't do justice to the points raised, I will write to members about specific things. I am meeting, and I have met the MHRA since I started, been very clear on expectations, and it is absolutely the role of Parliament to be the ultimate monitor of their work. They do play a vital role in fulfilling the government's health mission, balancing responsibilities to main product safety and championing innovation. If I can just make clear this point about being an enabler, it's about enabling innovative products to reach patients without compromising patient safety and without unnecessary delay. It is thanks to vaccines and medicines such as antibiotics approved by MHRA and modern surgical procedures that we are living longer, healthier and more active lives. And no medical product is completely free of risk. The main objective of the safety monitoring process is to identify any new risks that may emerge. And when this happens, the MHRA must take their responsibility seriously, rigorously and transparently when balancing population risks and benefits of each medical product, taking prompt and decisive action whenever that's needed. In regards to supporting safety, the MHRA do recognise the need to constantly seek to improve its monitoring systems to deliver better results. Recent improvements include implementing the new IT system called Safety Connect following recommendations from the Cumberledge Review. The IT system will improve the efficiency of reporting and processing of yellow card reports, much of which we've heard about today, supporting prompt identification and assessment of new safety concerns. In addition, the MHRA must make use of real-world data via the Clinical Practice Research Data Link, which collects anonymised patients' data from a network of GP practices across the UK, encompassing data from 60 million patients, including 18 million currently registered patients. They've recently launched a pilot in partnership with Genomics England to create a rich source of genetic information to investigate the role of genetic predisposition in the development of serious adverse drug reactions. The aim is to establish a yellow card biobank to reduce the number of harmful side effects caused by medicines, a step towards personalised prescribing. The Cumberland Review also highlighted the need to improve regulation of implantable medical devices. The government introduced in November last year the regulations to strengthen requirements for manufacturers to proactively monitor and report on medical devices once they're on the market, and I think, as noted by my friend from Washington and Gateshead South. Further reforms are planned to be laid before Parliament this year, including unique device identifiers and implant cards to improve the traceability of implanted devices, as well as increasing the classification of devices to ensure they receive the highest scrutiny throughout their lifetime. And finally, they have made progress in response to the wider set of recommendations set out in Baroness Cumberland's report. They've listened carefully to the people who gave evidence and to the findings, and they are committed to bring about those changes, and it is our job to make sure that happens. With regard to the yellow card scheme, it does provide the backbone of our safety monitoring system. It does rely on patients, parents, caregivers and health professionals volunteering reporting their comments. They do collect also reports of suspected safety concerns involving defective, falsified or fake health products. In last year, they assessed over 118,000 reports and identified 134 safety signals. But I take on board the comments made here today. When safety signals lead to confirmed risks, they can introduce specific risk minimisation measures, such as inducing particular warnings about the risk of side effects in the product information, restricting the use of the medicine or medical device, or suspending or removing the medicine or device from the market. They will continually proactively encourage reporting of adverse effects through improvements such as those within the new Safety Connect system, and make sure better connections between clinical systems working with the wider healthcare system. In terms of performance, Madam Deputy Speaker, the MHRA do recognise that there have been delays in some of the regulatory services that they provide, including licence applications for innovative and generic medicines, variations to licence and inspections of manufacturing and laboratory premises. Since September 2024, all new applications for market authorisations of established medicines are being assessed within expected timescales. So that is improving, but we will keep a very close eye on it. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I do want to reiterate my thanks to the Right Honourable Member for Tatton. I think this has been an informative and wide-ranging, but bizarrely wide-ranging but focused debate. I think trust is really, really important. Patients absolutely have to be at the heart of the work that we do and that the MHRA's work is, and patient safety is the foremost priority. They are continuing to work on improving engagement and involvement of patients in decision-making throughout the life cycle of products it regulates. It will continue to work to facilitate patient access to new medicine and medical devices in collaboration with health system partners across the UK. The regulator maintains its focus on continuous improvement and has implemented new ways of working to maximise productivity in ways that put patients and public health outcomes first. And I take the point from the Honourable Gentleman opposite that communication about that is absolutely key. It has turned around performance on clinical trials and is now on track to deliver all regulatory services within statutory timelines by the end of March 2025. Later this year, as part of its programme of reform, we'll be introducing the new point-of-care manufacturing legislation that makes the MHRA the first regulator in the world to introduce a tailored framework for innovative manufacturing methods, taking the manufacture and supply of medicines to the patients. It's truly an exciting development, and I pay tribute to those involved in doing so. The process for recruiting the new Chief Executive is well underway. We welcome Professor Anthony Harden, and his strategic focus is on helping the organisation protect patient safety through robust surveillance systems, embracing risk proportionate regulation and fostering an inclusive workplace place where people follow. And without putting him on the spot, I do think perhaps a parliamentary event of some sort that we bring people together to discuss that with them and build that trust is something we should think about. I'm pleased to support their work. They are internationally recognised as a regulator. We want to do better. The government will make sure that they are better.
Esther McVey to wind up.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to thank all members who have stayed late today and spoken today, many of whom have recounted deeply moving and harrowing experiences of their constituents. All contributions have reinforced the failings of the MHRA. In fact, listening to members, the verdict on MHRA is guilty as charged, confirming that MHRA is in need of substantial reform, and I feel sure that this Minister will ensure that that reform starts here, now and today.
Yeah. The question is, as on the order papers, who made that opinion say aye? Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it.